Welcome to Reframe the Podcast, helping you reframe your thought patterns, habits and mindsets to create the life that you want to lead. Hi, and welcome back to Reframe the Podcast, which I am resurrecting. Yay! And I'm doing so with a series of little mini episodes called Pod Bites, where I'll be sharing thoughts, tips, knowledge, insights, various bits and bobs in order to help you begin to foster a healthy relationship with food. Funnily enough, though, in this first episode, I'm not going to talk about food. I'm going to talk about people pleasing. And you might be thinking, well, how on earth does that relate? Well, it relates on various levels. Well, firstly, people pleasing can leave us exhausted, because quite often it means we're boundaryless. It means that we sacrifice our energy, our emotional energy, our physical energy in order to keep other people happy and satisfied. And that in itself is what we call a self-attunement disruptor. It makes it, when we're exhausted, it makes it really difficult to know whether or not we're hungry, whether or not we're full. So to attune to those natural biological cues. And it makes us more susceptible to emotional eating. Equally, if we find it difficult to assert ourselves, to use our voice, that can play out in our relationship with food. We may literally find ourselves swallowing down what we want to say. So there are a myriad of ways in which people pleasing has a direct impact on how we relate to food as well as how we relate to people. And people pleasing is a really common thread when it comes to exploring our relationship with food. And I think in part because we're conditioned to do it, especially as women. I'm speaking for myself as a woman, very much been, conditioned to be amenable, to be compliant, to be nurturing, giving, to always put myself out, to always sacrifice my own well-being in order to take care of other people. It took me a long time to undo, or even begin to undo a lot of that, a lot of my people-pleasing behaviours. And I would argue that I'm still a work in progress there. So it seems like an important place to start, or at least to begin to have a conversation and bring some awareness to. And I once read the words, and they didn't have any credit with them, so I'm not sure where they came from. So if any podcast listeners know, please do message me. And they were, people pleasing is the art of setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. Oh, how true is that? So here are my top tips for recovering from people pleasing. And one of the first reasons why people pleasing can happen is because we want to avoid conflict, because we become so concerned that saying no will be interpreted negatively, and we assume it will create conflict, so we avoid it by saying yes. So my first tip is to assume that everything is fine. Unless someone tells you otherwise, unless someone tells you there is a problem with your work or with you saying no, assume they are fine with it, because actually, most likely, they are. Feels mind-blowing, actually, to say that, because it's such a default setting to assume that someone is going to think the worst of us. And that fear of not being liked, that fear of being judged, that fear of not being thought capable, of being weak or not good at your job, not being a good friend, that is such a driver for self-sacrificing behaviours, for people-pleasing behaviours, that fear of conflict. So yeah, my first tip, assume everything is fine. My second tip is people-pleasing, obviously, means we can find it hard to say no. Okay. One of the things I used to find saying no to really hard was going out. Right? I am someone who needs solitude to recharge. I find socializing, especially in big gatherings, really, really exhausting, but I just kept doing it. And the reality is there were times where it was good and I went and had a really good time, and other times where I thought I wish I had gone with my gut instinct and just said no. And the key to this one, or if someone's asking you to go out, or even asking you to help, can you volunteer? Would you mind having my kids? Do you mind doing the school drop off? Can you look at my CV? Etc., etc. Because they don't have sight of what's going on around you. Create a pause. Okay, you need to create a pause, and that gives you a little time to consider the impact that demand, that question, that ask. You see, I use the word demand. That's very telling. It's not necessarily a demand, but it can feel like a demand. That gives you a little time to consider the impact it's going to have in your time and energy. So you can do this by saying, I'll think about that and get back to you. Just those words in a WhatsApp. I'll think about that and get back to you. Buys you time to consider, do I really want to do this? And that leads us into the third. So having created the pause, give yourself some time to consider the answer. And if the answer is no, avoid long justifications, because those long justifications give someone an opportunity to find the cracks. If they want to kind of offer something up as an alternative, sometimes people can be a little bit manipulative. They may be doing it from a place of, absolute kindness. But if you've said, oh, so sorry, we can't come, haven't been able to find a babysitter, they're going to say, oh, that's okay. My daughter, Katie, is looking to do babysitting work and she's free. It's stuck, right? So instead, I invite you to practice very clear, boundaried, closed responses. For example, sorry, I can't come, but I hope you have a good time. If it's a work-related one, sorry, I can't help, but I hope it works out, or I hope you can find someone who can. Full stop. Full stop. And the truth is, practicing these boundaries can feel really uncomfortable to start with, and you might feel guilty and you might be tempted to revert back to old behaviours. But remember, these new habits take time. Okay, asserting boundaries can feel really, really icky, but the more you do it, it's like using a muscle in the gym. The more you do it, the easier the exercise becomes, the stronger that muscle becomes. And with practice, you will be able to assert these boundaries and end up spending time and doing the things that you really want to do and spending time with those you really want to spend time with. If you can practice saying no, it means when you say yes, it means something. Just let that sit with you for a moment. Say no so that your yes means something. So there we go. First little pod bite episode. Food for thought. Something to digest. See what I did there? Terrible puns. But as ever, I am rooting for you. Go gently.